Welcome back to Auto Technic, and what is there not to love about today's video? We have one of Ferrari's most beautiful and prestigious cars in the shop today. We're looking at a 1967 275 GTB 4-cam. Very rare car, low production numbers, and it is a real honor and privilege to have this one in the shop today. And luckily, I get to bring you guys along the journey and show you all the work we're doing to the car. Alright, so let's just take a minute and really bring in the beauty of this car. These 275s are absolutely gorgeous. The styling and lines of them are just spot on. One of my favorite all-time Ferraris. It's kind of a shame it's here in the shop and we can't get the full silhouette of this car. You know, the lift and everything's blocking it, but they are absolutely gorgeous, and I think styling-wise, they nailed it on this one. These cars are pretty much perfect just as is. Super unique. Very beautiful. Now, I will admit that I am not the guy that is the historian of these older Ferraris. My area of interest with this brand has always been on technical details. I think that's just because how my mind is wired. I like the technical aspects of things in cars. So I'm only saying that as in, I focus on the technical stuff. I'm not a historian. I do know that they only built, of the 4-cams, 330 or 331 of these cars. They're incredibly rare. The only way that they get more rare than that is if it's an alloy body car. I think they only made 16 alloy body cars. So they're obviously incredibly rare and quite valuable. On these cars, I mean, the deck lid, the hood, and the doors are already aluminum, and the weight of this car is about 2,400 pounds. So I don't know what the weight of the aluminum body cars are and how much it saves, but these cars are actually pretty light to start with. So I will show you guys here in a bit, but it is equipped with the legendary Colombo V12. Very cool setup and a lot of great technology in it. But we're just giving you guys a quick walk around looking at the body of the car. It has these gorgeous vents up here on the C-pillar, which are kind of embodied in some of the newer cars and newer designs, and just the aggressiveness of those vents matches the beauty and curves of the car just perfectly. Same thing up here on the fender. It's just enough, just the right amount of detail. You can see the badge on the bottom, that these are bodied and designed by Pininfarina, classic design firm that partnered with Ferrari all the way up until I think 2015-ish, and that's when Ferrari started using their own Ferrari style center, design center, and in-house styling. So I think the last heavy Pininfarina styled cars for Ferrari were the 458 Speciale and the La Ferrari, and I think all the cars after that started being designed by Ferrari themselves. So absolutely gorgeous body. And I will say this car is built in the era when it was true hand-built cars. These are 100% nearly one-offs, hand-formed sheet metals on wooden bucks, done the old traditional coachwork style. So they're very special cars. You can see, take a look back here, just a very simple, beautiful back end or dual exhaust. And it has a lot of interesting unique quirks. So if we come back here and open the trunk lid up, there's our fuel fill right there. And if you guys seen the early Ferrari latches, they're super simple and clever. It's just a little ratcheting latch that opens and holds everything up. It's simple but ingenious, so it works great, and you can just tell that this car is pretty much spotless, pretty much perfect. So some extra floor mats in there, and we have the client's car cover. Underneath here we do have the spare tire, but we'll leave all that alone now. There's no point to dig in there. And a pretty spacious deep trunk, and everything fits and closes just beautifully. But you can see our side marker is just basically almost like Frenched into the body, so the body wraps around and it's inset in there, and the fit and finish is great. The headlight covers, and since this is later 67, it is a long nose. So the early 275s had a shorter nose to them, and it's reported that Ferrari ended up rebodying the car and making the long nose on them because the short nose was getting a lot of air up underneath the car aerodynamically, was causing a lot of lift, and the cars were unstable. So their solution was the long nose. So what really sets this car apart from other 275s out there is the fact that it's a 4-cam. Now, the only way to identify that this is a 4-cam is you can see that it has this nice but subtle dome on the center of the hood, and that's to clear the air filter assembly for all the carburetors. So the regular 275s are still the Colombo V12, just twin cam, one per bank of the engine. And since this is a 4-cam, we have 2 camshafts per bank of the engine, so the cylinder heads are quite a bit different, and our induction and carburetors are quite a bit different. So the only other big distinguishing factors on the outside of 275 4-cams comes back here on this drip rail right along the C-pillar, and this line will actually extend down and have a body line right up there if it's an alloy body car, and that's a seam that they had, and basically because of the way they needed to build the car and mate the quarter panels to the roof. So you can see that this one is just all one piece, and it's kind of how you'd expect on a regular car. So that denotes that we have a regular steel-bodied car, not an alloy car. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not an expert on the historics of these cars. You know, like I said, I worked in the dealership for quite a few years, and having cars like this rolled in did happen, but it wasn't nearly as common as a lot of the newer cars that we worked on. So I do have quite a bit of experience working on these older cars, especially older cars with carburetors, distributors. I mean, heck, I have a Sun distributor machine sitting here. But what I'm trying to say is I have the experience and seat time working on these cars, but just due to the rarity of them, the low number and volume of them, and the fact that a lot of them didn't come into the dealership, I naturally don't have as much experience on them as I do, say, like working on 355s and 430s and 458s and 812s. So that's just kind of a nature of the beast, right? It's really, you don't have the opportunity to build that experience working on the cars. Now, I will say that I have been fortunate where I did do basically a mechanical restoration on a 365 GTC4, and that's equipped with the same early Colombo V12 engines. It's actually pretty similar to this engine because the C4 cars are still a 4-cam engine, and it's actually a little bit different because it runs side draft carburetors as opposed to downdraft carburetors, which is a wild setup. If you've ever seen one, especially in person, it's kind of a trip because it has the Weber side drafts, and those carburetors bolt on to what looks to be an intake manifold, but it's really the valve cover. So the valve cover covers your camshafts, but has the intake ports that run into the head, and the carburetors bolt on directly to your valve cover, and then the intake ports go down in the center of the cylinder head into the combustion chamber. The valley of the engine's pretty much open. It has oil filters up there and some fuel vapor canisters, if I remember, up there. But there's no intake manifold in the center. And Ferrari did that to lower the hood line on the C4 as opposed to the 365 Daytona, which has downdrafts. Where I'm getting at with that is I've had that engine all the way out and did a full rebuild on it. So going through sealing up that engine, more importantly, things like setting up the distributors, setting up and adjusting not only the carburetors but the linkage is pretty complicated. It's heavily involved. That car runs 6 carburetors, so it's 6 2-barrels, so it's essentially 1 barrel of each runner of the carburetor feeds 1 cylinder of the engine, so it's almost like an ITB setup. So I've had plenty of time working on those, and honestly I really enjoy it. It takes a lot of finesse. Obviously the more experience you have with it, the better you are, but it's something that I really enjoy because it just, I think the best way to describe it is it feels more like an artistry that you're kind of expressing on the car. I mean, you're not just looking up a computer and looking at a scanned code and throwing a part at it. You're spending the time, you're making tweaks and adjustments, and it's really a matter of your ability to evaluate what the car is doing, assess it, know what to adjust in order to get the run good. And it's just more rewarding. So I honestly absolutely prefer working on these older Ferraris. It's more of a challenge. A lot of the cars are usually quite valuable, which makes it a little bit more, I don't know, I say challenging because you got to maintain the integrity of the car and maintain the value of it. So I guess what I'm just trying to say is working on these cars, even though it's a Ferrari, is quite a bit different than working on the newer Ferraris. It's a little bit of a different skill, but it's something that I actually enjoy quite a bit. Unfortunately, just due to the rarity of the cars, I don't get as much of an opportunity to do it as some. But nonetheless, we're honestly blessed that we have this car and the client is entrusting us to service it and work on it, and also allowing us to document all of our work on these videos. So a big thanks to the client for letting that happen, because I think a lot of us really just enjoy getting a deep dive in these cars. All right, so we've already peeked on the trunk, so let's come up here and take a peek what we all want to see, and that's that beautiful and legendary early Colombo V12. Now, you can't see the really glorious part of this, which is the 6 Webers. I believe these are DCN 40s. So it's 6 2-barrels. 1 barrel feeds each cylinder independently, so it's essentially an independent throttle setup. pretty unique for the era for 1967. I mean, it's pretty much race car technology in my opinion. But we can see we basically have two valve covers. That's denoting that this is a 4-cam engine. So we have our exhaust cam down here, our intake camshaft up here, and our spark plugs running down into the valley. So these 4-cam engines are rated at 300 horsepower, which I actually think is pretty impressive for a 3.3 liter engine, which is just, I think, just shy of 200 cubic inches. 300 horsepower out of a 200 cubic inch engine in my brain in 1967 is pretty impressive. So I think a lot of people get stuck on the fact that it's a V12, meaning it has a lot of cylinders, but it's incredibly small V12. Smaller than most V8s of the era. And I think that, like I said, the power output, it's not a huge impressive number, especially if you're comparing it to the muscle cars, which this car is nothing like a muscle car. But very respectable numbers. And I mean, these engines are actually really cool with the 6 Weber setup, and it's actually a dry sump engine too. So you can see our oil fill for our oil tank over there, which it's all factory dry sump from 1967. We have twin distributors right here, one for each bank, so it's basically 2 separate engines. We got 2 sets of points in each distributor, and you can see our accessories up front, reverse mounted alternator, just 1 belt, and this car is manual steering, so we don't have a power steering pump. There's really no other needed accessories. There's no AC in the car. Race car technology built for the road in 1967. This is definitely a road racing endurance type car, what it's set up for. A very big radiator, lots of cooling capacity, dry sump, 6 carburetors, twin distributors. Very cool setup. I will say that if you ever have to get into adjusting and synchronizing the carburetors and the distributors, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work. So on this particular car, I don't think we're going to have to get into that. And honestly, I don't want to get into that because on the bottom line is the expense. I personally find it quite enjoyable to work through all that stuff and get the cars tuned up and getting them run really well. But it's so time consuming to set up and synchronize each carburetor with each basically barrel of the carburetor to the cylinder, synchronize that carburetor, all the carburetors to each other, synchronizing the distributor, all your adjustments affect your other adjustments, getting the car the idle right, get it the drive right. It is a lot of work and it is very time consuming. So for the customer's sake, I hope I don't have to get into that. But really you can see that the condition of this car from the outside extends into the inside. This engine bay is pretty much flawless and immaculate, and honestly it needs very little other than just your basic service work, which is what it's in for. So that's one of the things we will be doing to the car. We're going to be doing an oil change, get new coolant into the car, new gearbox oil, brake oil, really just drop all the fluids of the car, get fresh fluids in, so that way the car is ready for the client to enjoy. All right, so we're in the 275, and I figure I'll give you guys the driver's point of view here. So you can see right here we have our beautiful wooden 3-spoke wheel, our speedometer, we have our tachometer, which is 7,500, which is still pretty impressive for that V12. We have that big laid back windshield, so you can see that our visors and the front of our top of the windshield's right up here, which feels like it's right by my head, even though it's really not that far. And I think it feels that way because the base of the windshield is like feet away, because the windshield is laid so far back. It's just kind of, it's playing tricks with you at the depth perception, so it's a little bit more unique when you're sitting in the car. I mean, you can actually even see the opening of the door where you sweep your legs in kind of underneath the base of the windshield. So pretty interesting setup, and visibility is really great. Like we mentioned, I have, I mean, a great view out of the front of the car. I will say, especially out of the back, again, a great view if you're looking over your shoulder or the rear view mirror. And speaking of looking over your shoulder, you're going to have to do a lot of that in this car because, well, no side view mirrors there and no side view mirror over there. So just a little bit of an extra step, you know, more driver involvement, honestly, when you're driving the car, which is why I like these older cars. It takes more of your attention to drive the car. You just can't be absent-minded and just drive the car on autopilot. You have to be fully engaged and locked in. But we have all of our switches here for our electric fuel pump, our lights, the fan control, interior lights, cigarette lighter. And I mean, it's pretty sparse as you'd expect from something from 1967. No AC, no radio. We have one of Ferrari's most classic features, so it is a gated manual transmission. This happens to be a 5-speed, and our reverse is actually forward and all the way up, where first gear would be on most standard cars. So you can see right there, I actually have it in reverse, and first gear is back where second would be, and all your other gears are basically one gear off, meaning move this up with my left hand, that's going to be our second gear. That's going to be our third gear, fourth all the way up, and fifth in the back. And it seems a little counterintuitive if you've never driven a dogleg type transmission like that, but it's really not that bad. The first couple times I drove them, I did not have any troubles finding what gear I was in, being sure I would put it back in first gear to stop. And honestly, I kind of like it. I think I like it because it's unique and it's unusual, and it's just another thing that you have to think about what you're doing while you're driving the car, which again increases your driver involvement and makes it more enjoyable. So that pretty much covers everything that's in the inside of this car. There's really not a whole lot in here. And as we discussed, the condition of everything in here is pretty much perfect. It's like a 10 out of 10. I mean, everything works. All the switches work. All the gauges work. Our power windows work beautifully, going up and down on both windows. And I mean, if you're catching a trend on the rest of this car is immaculate. I mean, it's like a time capsule jumping back in 1967 and seeing what these cars were like when they're brand new. You know, it's one thing I often think about with these older cars or some of the more special Ferraris is what was it like for the people that took delivery of those cars brand new? Because some of these cars are so special to experience and drive by today's standards. What was it like in 1967? I mean, it must have been such a wild experience driving this, because the styling, the aesthetics, the quality, how well this car drives compared to everything else of the era is absolutely wildly different than anything else that was available. And one of the other cars that always makes me think about that is the F40. The F40 is just so radical and extreme, and I cannot imagine what it was like for a guy in 1989 to be driving that car. I wish I knew what was going through his head, because by today's standards, the F40 is absolutely insane, and I can't imagine that in 1988. Just can't comprehend it. All right, so I think we got a good look over of this car, showed you guys around a little bit. Once we have it up in the air, I'll show you underneath and the underworkings of this car so you guys can get a view of what the bottom side of a 275 looks like. But before we do so, I think I need to turn my attention to actually addressing some of the customer's concerns in the car. So the main reason we have this car in the shop, other than the fluid service, is because I'm being told that it is incredibly difficult to start when cold. Now, unfortunately, when I picked the car up yesterday, it was already at temperature, so when I started it, it fired right up and ran fine. So our hot start is great. It took minimal cranking. It took almost no input of the carburetors. The car fired right off, found idle at 1,000 RPMs right away, and idled smooth. So I drove the car home, got it on the lift, positioned it, shut it off, let it sit overnight. So it's dead stone cold right now. I've done nothing with it. You can see dead cold up here. So we're going to take advantage of the fact that the car is stone cold right now. I mean, I do need to jump in and do an inspection on the car today, but since it's stone cold, I only really get that opportunity once a day. We're going to run through, try to do the cold start on the car, see how it fires up, and really that's going to give us the information we need so we can start to go, know where to look or what areas we need to check to see why the car is so difficult to start. So let's go and see if we can get this thing fired up and really see how if it wants to play nice on this cold start or not. All right, we got neutral. Turn the key on. We'll prime the electric pump. All right, we'll shut that off now so we don't have to listen to it for a second. But I have mentioned there's one thing that I didn't like about the car. It has to do with the throttle pedal, and because of that, I'm going to be very aggressive on my throttle right now, on basically using the accelerator pumps to get fuel into the engine. So I'm going to be doing full all the way down. That pedal just goes so deep. I don't like it. So that was 3. We'll give that one more. All right, we'll do the fuel pump back on just to be sure and see how this thing fires off. All right, a little cold-blooded. There we go, cleared up, about 1,500. And just keeping the RPM up a little bit to get some heat into the engine. and I need to turn on my exhaust fan. Whew! Well, she kicked right off. You can see our idle's a little bit low because it's just a little cold. Just letting it run to build some temperature, but it will come up and idle right about 1,000 when it's fully warm. I apologize for the fan noise in the background, but honestly, I got to get the fumes out of the shop, and I want to keep this running to build heat in it. I don't want to do a cold start on it and then just shut it off right away. I really try to avoid that on all my cars, especially on these older cars that run the point system where they don't have as strong of a spark. They're carbureted, so they still run a bit richer on cold start. I don't want to just fire them off, let them run, shut them off. I'm just asking to foul the spark plugs out. So we're going to let it run, build some temperature, and you guys can see that it's just running so smooth. Just purring, idling away. So, I'm just going to let the car idle. I'll bring you guys back because I'm pretty sure I know exactly what's going on from multiple complaints the customer has and this cold start issue. But I don't want to talk over the car and fan, so I'm going to let this warm up, idle. Once everything's shut down, I'll bring it back and we'll cover what I think is going on. Alright, so we had a stone cold V12. I had the electric fuel pump running to prime the mechanical pump and get fuel up to the carburetors. And I did run the accelerator pedal from 0 to full throttle, I think 6 times, which was probably a little bit more than I needed. We're not using any sort of choke, and I would say that that was a pretty exceptional startup for a carbureted and points ignition V12. It fired up, it was a little rich, and it took a little bit to get cleared out, but then it cleared out, it stayed running, and let it run and warm up. And I certainly don't deem that as difficult to start when cold. Now, I will say that I have stopped by the client's house a couple months ago when we first started talking about the problem this car was having, and he did try to start it then and there, and I did see what he was talking about, although he was the one trying to start the car. Now, before we get into that, I've mentioned I think I know what's going on, and I'm pretty sure my cold start just confirmed it. We need to circle back to when I was driving the car back from the dealership. I drove the car back, the client was following me on the car, and when I got back, we sat and chatted, and he wanted to know what I thought of the car. And obviously I told him, there's not much to complain about when you're driving a 275. But I did have one thing on the car that I did not like, and that was the throttle pedal. And the best way to describe it is the throttle pedal, when it's on its dead rest, or when it's closed and you start applying throttle pedal on the car, you have normal resistance. So it feels completely normal. However, when you're driving the car and the engine's running, when you push the throttle pedal down, you kind of get no increase in engine RPM to probably like 25-30% of the throttle pedal. I mean, if this is the gas pedal, I'm visually imagining that I'm moving my foot all the way to about here before I start to get any kind of increase in engine RPM. But in that whole range, it feels completely normal, like you are actuating the throttles. And I found that it made it really hard to drive because my brain thought that I was pushing the throttle and then it wants to release the clutch, but I don't have the engine RPM. And it's kind of like it tricks your brain out and you kind of get in a fight with your feet on driving the car. And I actually found the easiest way for me to drive the car was to hold the throttle all the way basically to the point to where the engine would start to increase RPM, then drop it back, and then start letting the clutch out and applying gas as I drove around. And once I did that, the car drove pretty normal, but it took a lot of brain energy to drive the car that way. And one of the other complaints that the client had, he says at certain RPMs, the car will kind of get to a part where it gets like jerky or bucky, and the only way for him to get that to stop happening is to put the clutch in. And that did happen to me one time going through a roundabout, and it was at the time where the car, it's a stick shift, right? So if you start to lug the engine and the car starts to buck and jerk, you would normally give it a little bit of gas to get out of it, and you do that in the car, but like I said, it feels like the first part of that throttle pedal was dead space, where you're giving it that input and nothing's happening, so the only way to get the car to stop doing that was to toss the clutch in and then release it back out and continue driving. It was no big deal. So I told the client that before I even got the car in the shop and started looking at it, and I didn't like the way the pedal felt. And if we're jumping back to that 365 that I talked about earlier, it has, in my opinion, a more complex throttle setup, meaning it has those side draft carburetors. So there is a shaft running down each bank of the engine that actuates each arm on the carburetor. Then it has a rod that goes to the center of the engine on a bell crank that operates the two different banks of carburetors, that had a separate rod that went back to the firewall, that had a lever that actuated a throttle rad. and a shaft that went down to the pedal. It is an incredibly complex setup. But the adjustment of that, because you have a lot of shafts and arms, is critical. Well, we have a very similar setup on this car. So, where I'm going with this throttle pedal issue is the client, when he tried to do the cold start on the car, he was pumping the accelerator pump or the throttle pedal to get fuel into the carburetors or into the manifold, so that way the car would fire off. However, if our throttle pedal is adjusted incorrectly, if he's being ginger on that pumping motion of the throttle pedal, he thinks he's pumping fuel into the car, but he's really not. So then you're just cranking the car, cranking the car, cranking the car until you draw in enough fuel for everything to combust. So that's why when I went to go start this car, I was so intentional on going full throttle all the way down multiple times to make sure I'd rather have had too much fuel than not enough, and the car fired right off. So what I'm suspecting we're going to have here is an improperly adjusted throttle linkage. So essentially we're pushing that throttle that first 30 degrees of range, and we're getting no movement on the carburetor linkage and the accelerator pumps, meaning you think you're pumping the car, the prime it, to start it, and you're doing nothing, even though you're moving the pedal. So we need to take a look at all the throttle pedal and linkage to see what's going on, to see if we can find anything that supports that theory. Now, I will say also, when I took this car to roll it to full throttle, that throttle pedal, I mean, you have to roll your foot, and you kind of run out of reach on your foot to roll the pedal, where it feels like you can't move your foot down more to get full throttle. So it feels like the pedal does nothing at the beginning, and it rolls too far also. It doesn't feel natural. And if what is going on is what I think is going on, that's the cold start issue, because we're not getting enough pedal movement to actuate the accelerator pumps to get the engine primed with fuel. It's hard to start. It'll also match the bucking issue, because if you get the car and it's starting to lug and you're off the gas and you think you're on the gas to get it out of that bucking state, but you're really not. It's still sitting on idle, even though you're moving the throttle pedal. That'd be the same thing. So let's take a peek at this linkage and see what's going on. Okay, so we're going to start up here just for the sake of ease. And I have my light, and if we look right here on the back of this distributor is this Heim joint, and this is where our throttle linkage right here is coming into our carburetors, and it runs on this shaft. So you can see that we have this arm that's bolted onto the shaft, and if we look over here, we have a corresponding arm. You can see all the linkage right there that's coming straight out, and then there's another shaft that's running down to the bottom of the car to where the pedal is at. We'll get the car up in the air, and I'll be able to show you the bottom side of this in a little bit more detail. But the best way to describe it is we have the lever coming off the throttle pedal. It's driven off of a shaft. It has a long lever like that to that rod that's coming up. That rod comes up to that lever right there to this shaft that runs across the engine bay. And get this set. Terminates right there. It has another rod right here and our shaft that runs up to all of our carburetors. If you guys can see, it's tight in here. That arm on this shaft has no indexing point, along with the other arm over there and the arms down on the bottom of the throttle pedal. That indexing point is key, right? Because it's all about leverage on how we're moving everything, and we're changing the direction and angle that this pedal movement is making to the carburetor quite a bit. So if things aren't adjusted or set up correctly, that's going to cause the exact problem that I felt when I was driving the car. I don't think our problem is up here on the top side, although we may have to come back and adjust some of that. I need to get the car up in the air and show you where I really think this problem's stemming from. Alright guys, we got the 275 up, and you can see our engine and oil pan up there. And coming through right here is our throttle shaft that feeds inside of the car to our throttle pedal. And you can see it has this arm out here that actuates this rod that runs up, and you can see the backside of a distributor there and the remaining linkage that we looked at from the top side. Let's see if I can get you guys zoomed in on it. So you can see that linkage up there, and that arm is 90 degrees essentially to that linkage, and the other one was probably 45 degrees off of that on the passenger side. So maybe some of you guys can probably spot the problem right here, but here is our shaft, here's our arm, and here's the pivot point with our rod, and it's completely in line. And right now the pedal is at a complete rest, But what we have going on is when you move the pedal, you have to sweep this arm quite a ways, which is moving this heim joint forward and not down. So if I get my hand in here, you can see that when I move this linkage, try to get both and not cover it with my hand, you can see that I'm moving the pedal, and that's the movement I was talking about. But if you look up top at the upper shaft, let me get you zoomed in, get you guys up on that upper shaft, you can see that we have all that pedal movement and there's zero action happening on the remaining linkage. So I have to get really aggressive down here before it actually starts pulling down, which is starting to open the throttles. So that's what I think was happening when the client was in the car and pumping the gas to do a cold start. He's doing this thinking he's actuating the accelerator pumps, but effectively to the carburetors he's doing nothing. At the pedal he's doing a lot of work. So this has to break over its top dead center before it starts pulling this rod down in order to make that adjustment. Now let me get my light here and show you. Fortunately, on these older cars, and much like a lot of Ferrari stuff, everything is adjustable. So I have a splined shaft where that arm goes on. So I need both hands. Get my light here. So I'm going to have to take this arm off of this shaft, take it off the splines, and rotate it forward more so that way it more immediately starts pulling down on that shaft. That means I'm going to have to readjust my throttle stop, and then I'm going to have to go back and readjust all my linkages. So honestly, with that information, I'm going to take it, report back to the client, talk to him. I'm pretty sure he's going to give me the okay to make the adjustments to that throttle pedal. I hope it's going to be relatively quick, but I mean, like I said, it has a ripple effect because if I start changing the length of those linkages, I have to make all the other ones match. Now, I should be able to do that and adjust the linkages and not have to get into any carburetor adjustments in itself, but we will see. So, in the meantime, since I have the car up in the air, I'm going to run through. I'm going to finish my inspections on the car so that way when I talk to the client, I can give him a full report of the condition of the car, the findings, and what we recommend. Once I'm done with those inspections and I talk to the client, I'll probably circle back around. I'll give you guys a little tour of the bottom side of the car, and then hopefully we'll be adjusting that throttle pedal, knocking out the service, and with any luck, we'll have this thing back out on the road and seeing how much better it drives. Good morning, guys. So last night I finished up with the inspection of the 275, so now I've thoroughly gone over it from top side to bottom side, and really no surprises. Much to my expectations, judging by the condition of the car on the top side, it's just as beautiful and well sorted on the bottom side. Honestly, this car is in just good of condition mechanically as it is cosmetically. This car is absolutely pristine. It really, honestly, it doesn't need anything other than the fluids that we're going to be addressing here today, and also the geometry of the throttle pedal. Once that's fixed mechanically, this car is going to be completely sorted and ready to go. Now, I did mention that I was going to give you guys a little tour of the car once we had it up in the air, and well, you can see I've already got the wheels off, so we can take a look in the wheel wells, take a look at the car from, this vantage point, and I'll drop you guys under and show you the bottom side because it's not too often we get to drop ourselves underneath the 275 and take a good peek. So we'll just start up here at the front suspension, and this is all pretty typical of the era for Ferrari, dual upper and lower control arms. And it runs the classic Koni shocks. That was standard. And as we're talking, true knockoff wheel setup. Disc brakes. Manual steering box right up there. And I would say one of the most unique things up here, if you see this duct right here. So that is actually our fresh air duct for our heaters. So if I bring you guys around and we take a peek in this front grille, you can see right up there is our blower motor that actually brings the air in. Runs it through that duct, up through our heater box and into the car. So a pretty unique setup, but really it's pretty standard on Ferraris of this era. Pretty much all the cars of the 60s and 70s have that setup. So we take a peek here on the passenger side. You can see it has the corresponding fan over there. And again, the same duct. So it's a symmetrical system. And really over here, it's pretty much the same thing. Upper and lower control arms, our shock, spindle and brakes. Again, this is pretty standard for the cars of the time. And drop you guys to the back. And this is actually unique to the 275s is because the 275 platform was the first Ferrari to move away from a solid axle and run a transaxle. So it's running dual upper and lower control arms back here. with the classic conies, and you can see that logo back behind the spring. Pretty cool logo. So with the car up in the air, we can get a really good look at this transaxle. So we have our 5-speed transmission right back here, combined with our rear diff, going to our independent rear suspension. Now the 275 really kicked off the Ferrari tradition of having the front engine V12 and the rear mounted transaxle, although there are a few exceptions after the 275 with a front engine V12 and a front mounted transmission. Ones that come to mind are like the 365 GT-C4 and the 400 series, which is kind of the replacement for the C4. They do have the front mounted transmission. They still retain the independent rear suspension, but the differential is back here, and they are connected with a torque tube, so it's not a normal drive shaft. So it's a bit of a hybrid of this setup. You don't really get the benefit of the better weight distribution. So you can see back here that the car is constructed of a tube chassis. It's really an actually oval tube, and that's very standard of the era through these early cars all the way up into like the 308s. It's pretty much a similar construction. So these tubes are all welded together. The body panels are welded to them, and some of the filler panels are actually made out of like a fiberglass material, which is pretty standard. But you can see that we're underneath this car and how absolutely immaculate and amazing it looks. You can see that it's actually an enclosed drive shaft and a torque tube that is mounted rigidly to the gearbox or the transaxle, and also up to the clutch bell housing. We'll get up there and I'll show you how it's all bolted together and mounted. You can see all of our oil fills and drains are safety cabled. So we're gonna have to redo that when we go through for the oil change. But all of our exhaust is in absolutely amazing condition. I mean, it all looks pretty much brand new and perfect. Again, suspension, everything's tight, solid, no play, no wear, and it's all just in outstanding mechanical condition. So now we're bringing you guys forward so we can see our torque tube, all of our bracing, and up here to our bell housing, we have our clutch arm in there. Again, it's all rigidly mounted, and up to the oil pan of this legendary Colombo V12. Now, interesting thing for the era, we bring you over here. It's a dry sump oiling system, so you can see our oil tank is sitting up there. Again, we have the safety wire that we're going to have to contend with for just the basic oil change. We have all of our muffler boxes, and pretty cool feature up here. You can see all of the primaries for the headers feeding down into our muffler box there. So very cool. Again, pretty normal, the cars of this area, how it's all set up. See all of our oil lines coming in. That yellow line is the traditional fuel line for these cars. So that's our fuel line coming in. There is an electric pump at the back of the car. It's going to bring our fuel up here to a mechanical pump, then up to our carburetors. So you can see here at the engine, all of our cross members are actually welded to the car. So if you ever have to take the engine out, your only choice is through the top, which I will say, having gone through and taken one out before, it is a tight fit and you really got to be careful getting these out. But under here, again, it's just as clean, immaculate, and in great condition. And as I discussed, there's really nothing that this car needs other than a little bit of basic service work and correct his issue with the throttle. Okay, so I've been talking enough and it's time to get to work on this 275. Now, I think I'm going to start with making that adjustment to the throttle pedal before we jump into the service work. But since the car is cold, I'm going to take advantage and do one more cold start on the car. Now, when I did my cold start yesterday, I actually thought I did 4 sweeps of the throttle, and I actually, advantage of having video, watched back and saw that I did 5, and the car was overfueled. It didn't fire up quite that cleanly, although it did fire up quickly and get running. So I'm going to go through and do that procedure again. I'm probably going to give it 3 full pumps of the throttle pedal, and then we're going to fire the car up. Again, we're going to let it run, build some temperature, just kind of make it a little easier on the engine. However, why I do it this time, I think I'm going to see if I can get some cameras set up. Maybe a camera watching the bottom clutch linkage, maybe a camera up top watching the top clutch linkage, and see if I can get something on the throttle pedal and even maybe the carburetors. So that way you guys can see the difference or the relationship of when I make the movement on the pedal in relation to the actual carburetors themselves. And you'll see where the geometry is off, and we actually, best way to describe it is we have lost movement, meaning we're making the positive movement on the pedal, but all that motion is lost moving that rod forward and not pulling it down. So I'll get everything set up, and then we're going to get this thing fired off, let it warm up, and then we're going to make our changes to our throttle pedal. Okay, I'm going to shut the fuel pump off so we don't have to listen to it. Now we're going to give it 3 pumps, and just pay attention and watch this linkage in relation to my foot. because there's really no play in the pedal right here. And as I rotate it down, we're not getting the movement we need is immediate out of the carburetors. Okay, there's our pumps. Now we're going to go ahead and fire this thing up. Looks like it wants more fuel. So if you notice, like right here, I have no change on the engine and a lot of pedal movement, because I should be having a change in engine RPM immediately, and this makes it hard to feather the throttle on this thing. So we're just going to let this run for a little bit and get up the temperature. Alright, so the car's been running for a little bit, the engine's warm, up the temperature, and I'm going to just give it some throttle stabs, and that way you can see that the actual throttle response out of the engine in relation to the carburetor opening is outstanding, but the throttle response on the pedal, because of our leverage, is not. So if I go and put the pedal where there's almost no play, like right here, then do that, you can see that it's running like it should. So it's really this big dead spot right here. We need to get rid of that. Now I can tell you that I'm watching this pedal right now, and the slack in there feels a lot worse when I'm not watching the pedal and trying to drive the car than it looks right now. Right now it doesn't look that bad, but I can assure you, driving the car, it is noticeable. And really, you know, we're driving like that. So I'd say we have about maybe an inch before we get any change in the carburetor and the engine idle. But when you're actually driving the car, we're much further down with the pedal. So now it's time to make our adjustments and fix this issue. Perfect. So I can feel pretty much this is where the pedal wants to travel, sitting up with this arm up here and down to there. So I'm moving the pedal inside the car. I'm just trying to figure out where I want this arm to be. So that's kind of the top of the pedal travel, then it falls down, stops right there. So I'm just watching to see what's going to give me the best movement of this linkage. And the shaft wants to slide in, so it's an 8 by 1.0 thread pitch for that grease zerk that was in there, and I don't have an 8 by 1.0 bolt handy, so I just use a tap so I can kind of pull and keep the shaft from sliding in. But I think right here with this at that 90 degree, this puts the arm right about there. So, and we're going to run the pedal down to about full throttle. I like that. So I need to find a way to get this positioned or assembled without it moving. So I found that I can put the spring on without it attached to this yet. Get that in. That's good. We'll get our bolt in here. And loosely set this nut on. And is what I've been doing with this spring is rotate it. Well, I gotta move this nut out of the way so I can rotate it around and hook it onto the lever. So that I can work this up back here. Get this free of this spring. Now I can work that arm and get it hooked onto our shaft. Bring this back around. Now we can get this nut, or this washer and nut on. So that's about full throttle. It wants to sit about right there. Let's so I think I got that adjustment where I want it, because it should rest right there once I put this pedal stop back on, and then it's going to sweep down to about right there. And that's going to be direct movement on the carburetors from idle all the way down. So we don't need this in there anymore. Let me work to get this reinstalled, and we'll check the actuation of the pedal inside the car before we worry about connecting our linkage back up onto our shaft here at the bottom. Spring. And how far is our linkage? Our linkage is super close. So I think with this, we're almost there. Let's hop inside the car and see how we like the pedal. Alright, so the car is still at chest height, so I can't really get in there, but we can look at the throttle pedal in relation to the clutch and brake. I don't know if you guys can see, but it's a couple inches, I'd say 2 inches further rearward than those two pedals. Now I can come in here with my brake pedal depressor, and we can kind of feel how this pedal is working. And if we roll it down, I have pretty good travel. So this is one thing I noticed when I was working the accelerator pumps. I also noticed it when I was driving the car. And that's if I wanted to get deeper into the throttle, you have to really push the pedal down quite a ways. And it was much worse before we made this adjustment, where you almost had to roll it way past the floor. And it's almost like you ran out of ankle movement in order to get there. Like you could not physically move the pedal far enough. So I think with the pedal resting about right here, trying to kind of gauge my sweep, because we're still disconnected from the carburetors, I'm only working the throttle. I kind of want the pedal to rest about so. And if I'm looking there, I think that's going to be all the pedal movement we need. We don't really want to go much further down. I can feel the resistance. It kind of stops right there. But I don't want to go much further down than that because it's going to be hard to press it. So we need to adjust our stop so the pedal doesn't return this far back. I'm pretty happy with where the arm is on the shaft. I think we just need to adjust that bracket and that pedal stop so the pedal sits in a good relationship to our brake pedal so the car is easy to drive. So I'll jump back down there and make some adjustments, and I think I'll bring you guys back once I have this adjusted where I want, and then we'll start talking about the linkages. All right, I got some updates. I've been fussing with this pedal a little bit, and I got multiple things figured out, meaning we're going to make this better than it ever was. So, for starters, I was messing with our end-stop adjustment, and if we bring it down, here's the hardware, which I think we can all easily agree is not factory. However, if I run that in pretty much at its end of travel, you can see that I'm out of adjustment. And this arm that's on here, obviously that's not a factory piece either. That's something that somebody's added on because they had the problem with the throttle pedal rolling too far backwards, like I was just showing you inside the car. Right now, I put my brake pedal depressor back on the throttle, so it's holding it at the position I want it to be at rest. And you can see our linkage is at a much better angle, and you can obviously tell that that's why I'm not going to have enough adjustment to get that to actually hold the throttle where it needs to be. But I was looking at this a little deeper, and like I said, this whole setup's not factory, and if I, it's not doing any harm, but it's not how the car was intended to be. Now that I've corrected the geometry at this arm onto this linkage, you can see that it has much more angle to it here. And that linkage all the way up top and onto the carburetors has a hard stop, meaning it can't rotate backwards. Because this linkage was straight in line with this rod beforehand, when it would go to the rest position, it could over-articulate and go backwards. So whoever was setting this up last made this bracket, put that bend in it and that bolt to prevent the pedal from going too far rearward. Now that I have this all the way over here, this arm can't go too far rearward because it's trying to push up on this linkage, and the throttle linkage at the top side and the carburetors is stopping its movement, meaning all the throttle stop mechanism is essentially up onto the carburetors itself. It doesn't have this stop down here. Now, the reason why it was able to go backwards last time is because this arm was straight in line with this rod, and it wasn't moving the rod upwards, it was moving the rod rearwards with that sweep. So then whoever's solution was this throttle stop, so that way they got the throttle where it wanted to be. So as what I'm saying is, now that I have the proper angle to this lever on this rod, I don't need this throttle stop. I can take this off and my throttle pedal is going to stop where I want it just because of the leverage and the mechanics of all the linkage. However, you can see that it's a piece of all thread right here that goes up to these ball joints that you take off and adjust with this end cap right here. I already loosened my jam nut on this one, and I spun this fitting all the way off just to see how much thread I had in this fitting. And I maybe had, let's say, I'd probably say ½ an inch. So then I adjusted it. Basically, I was only going to give myself a ¼ inch, so that way I had plenty of thread engagement in this piece. Reset my jam nut. I have this rod disconnected up top. It's too short. So this was something I was fearful of on all the adjustments, that once I moved this arm right here, it was going to change the required length of this rod, and although they are adjustable, I don't have enough rod to make the adjustment I need. So I can adjust the rod and reconnect it, but that's going to have my pedal too far rearward. If I make the rod longer, as I increase the length of that rod, my pedal's going to come down where I want it. The bad news, I need a new piece of rod. The good news is that it is just a piece of all thread, so if I just source a longer piece of all thread, I can cut it a little bit longer than the one I have right here, and then I'll be able to make my needed adjustments so I have the throttle pedal sitting at rest where I want it, and I'll have the proper geometry and full sweep of the throttle. So that means we're going to have to stop once again on the throttle pedal project, and well, I think for now, luckily the car is already warm because we ran it, so I'll probably drop the engine oil, work on getting the gearbox oil out. We'll drain the coolant out of the radiator and block. The car needs a brake flush, so we're just going to address all the fluids, get that stuff done, and then hopefully by the time I'm done with all the fluids on the car, I'll have my new rod for my throttle linkage, and we'll be ready for the final adjustments on that pedal. So I think I'm going to take care of getting all these fluids changed in the car, and then once I have my material for this throttle linkage, I'll bring you guys back and we'll finish that project up. Well, we got the service items taken care of on this 275, and I gotta tell you guys, if you've ever worked on a Ferrari, you probably know this, but doing anything, even if it seems like normal routine maintenance, simple items such as the coolant flush and all these oil changes on this 275, they really take a lot longer than they do on your regular daily drivers or most cars that we're used to for a variety of reasons. But I will say that even on these older historic Ferraris, it's even worse, where there's just odd things that you have to contend with that really slow down what seems to be the simplest, easiest job. So let me drop you underneath and I'll show you kind of what I'm talking about and give you some examples of this. Start right up under here for the oil change. So you guys saw in the video that I ended up popping this cover off of the oil pan, and that is because there's not a drain plug on the oil pan. So I needed to get the oil out of the pan. Now, we did discuss that this car is a dry sump, so the majority of the oil is stored over here in this oil tank, which I do have a drain plug on right there. And I did drain that first. That's always my go-to on a dry sump car. Drain the sump first, then the oil pan in case anything flows back into the engine. I want to make sure I get all the oil out. But back to the pan, we have no drain plug, so I needed to get the oil out of the pan, and I ended up pulling quite a few quarts of oil out. But I could see that this cover plate needed to come off, and you can see that we have this hard oil line right here to contend with. And I do have this junction where I could have split this line right here, but this fitting is going to feed into about right there, and you can see that it's still covering this plate. So I kind of looked at it, and I mean, is really pick your poison, right? I could take this off and hope that I could get this cover plate off, but I still would have limited access and I'd have to sneak the plate up and in. Or I could come over here and just take off the 2 bolts and get this whole pipe off out of the way, which is the route I chose, and then I was able to pop this off. Now when I popped this plate off, a few small pieces of the gasket that was on there kind of tore and stayed with the upper section of the oil pan. So I took some gasket material and I made my own gasket for it, got it back on, it's all sealed back up, everything's torqued, cleaned up all of our sealant around it so it looks like nothing ever happened, it was never there. We got all of our oil out, got our pipe reinstalled, then you can see that a lot of the stuff on this car is safety wired. So get better light in there, you can see that I had the safety wire those 2 bolts together and get them on there. And it's also the same thing with our drain plug on our oil tank. Again, it's safety wired, you can see I torque striped it as well. So it's items like that. It's a simple oil change, right? But I have to end up pulling the other line off, pulling the cover plate off, and the scope of work grows where I have to make a new gasket, you have to clean everything up, get it back on, get it sealed, get it torqued, get everything reinstalled, safety cable it, and it just ends up taking a simple oil change and it grows much more than you'd expect. I'm not complaining, just trying to explain. I'm pretty used to this stuff on these cars. Just trying to kind of convey what has, now become my norm. But we'll drop back here at the transaxle, and again, the same thing. Safety cabled. So we got our drain plug here, a fill plug over there, so I had to cut the safety cable off, got my plugs out, drained all my oil out. Also on this one, it has a filter on this drain plug, which actually comes up and over here, and when you try to pull it out, this plug hits the exhaust, and we have the frame up there. So I had to loosen the exhaust a little bit so I could get this exhaust down, so then I could get this plug worked in between the exhaust and the frame and out. So again, another thing, your simple tasks such as pulling this plug out, and you have to end up doing more work to get that out. But with all that being said, this got it out, cleaned the filter, put it back in, filled it with fresh oil, got our fill plug back in, and once again went through, re-safety cabled everything, re-torque striped it. Now, fortunately for the coolant aspect of this car, really not a whole lot to talk about. That was actually pretty straightforward. So got all the coolant drained out of it, refilled it with fresh coolant, and it's good to go. So that's really the bottom side. Well, we also did the brakes and clutch, but that's pretty standard other than the fact that the fill and the reservoirs are really small. Well, they're small reservoirs, and the hole to fill them up is very small. So that takes a little bit of, I guess it slows down the job versus having a bigger reservoir. But it's all easy enough. So with that, that covers the bottom side of the car on the service. I'm going to drop the car down because we have some things we need to talk about up in the engine bay. So the car is back down to the ground so we can get a good view of the engine bay. You can see that I got new filters put on. I already filled it with fresh coolant. And we can see that is our oil fill for the dry sump tank over there. Now, I will say that I've already went through and filled it up, and I ended up putting in 10 liters of oil in the tank, and that has me at the midpoint on the dipstick. Now, that doesn't account for, I mean, the engine has no oil in it, so when we start the car up and run it, that level in the tank is going to drop because we're going to be filling the engine with some oil. Also, the filters are empty. They're going to fill up with oil. So once the car is running, we're going to finalize our oil level. It's going to take several more quarts. This car is actually... it uses a lot of fluids. In between the gearbox, I think I ended up putting 6 liters in the gearbox of gearbox oil. In between all the oil, this thing's probably going to end up around 15 liters of engine oil. And coolant, I mean, this thing uses a lot of fluids, but it makes sense. This is a car that's designed for endurance racing, road racing, and that extra capacity of those fluids was really designed to help manage the heat out of the car, the engine oil, the transmission oil. It helps keep everything cool. So that's really why that is the case. So let's take a second and just talk about the ignition system here. This car is still running its original points. Now, there are a lot of aftermarket kits out there that allow you to convert these distributors to electronic ignition. I will say, first and foremost, I am a big fan of electronic ignition. I feel that there is only upsides to them. You have better cold starting, the car has better combustion efficiency, you have a lot hotter spark. Depending on how your point setup is ran, if it's running on a lower voltage like 6 volts, you can get rid of the resistors, you can run the coils at a true 12 volts, a lot more spark energy. Really, across the board, it is far superior and much better. However, it has its place. This car is probably one of the prime examples of that because, in my opinion, this car, with it being so desirable, such a collector status car, and so original, I feel that this car has more value by retaining the original points than it does with the electronic ignition. Sure, an electronic ignition in this car would really help with the cold start. It would help it run a lot better and it'd bring a lot of benefits. But this car is just so rare, such limited numbers where they are made, and it's really a collector status car that I don't like switching it. I don't like changing it. I like to keep it original. I like to keep it how it was intended. And I feel that it's just better that this car retains the points. I mean, so much so that that's why I have a distributor machine. So that way when I have these old Ferraris come in, I can tune up the distributors, run them on the machine, and make sure they're just the way they need to be. So yes, points is kind of an archaic, definitely almost, I'd say, dead technology where we've had a lot better things come. There's still a very small niche of cars that should still have them, in my opinion. That it's not worth converting this car. I feel that it would kind of diminish the value and the prestige of the car. I don't like doing it. So, not saying that I won't. If a customer really wants me to and they're really dead set, I will put an electronic ignition in a car like this. I will remove everything, save it, so that way if they ever want to put it back 2 points, they can. Now, I will say that I've converted countless 308s, Indinos, and a lot of other cars to the electronic ignitions. But a lot of those cars aren't, in the same category on value as what this car is. So it's a little bit easier of a decision. So say if you have a car that's not necessarily a collector status, or it's the condition or mileage kind of dictates that it's not so valuable, then to me it's a no-brainer. You'll have the hotter spark, you have the multiple sparks below 3,000 RPM, really just pure upsides. However, in this particular case, like I mentioned, it's a prime example. It's going to retain the points. So we've discussed the points. I've already took a peek, checked my points gap, checked the condition of the points. Everything looks good. My rotors, again, no wear. They look good. Distributor caps look good. It's hard to see, but back here, I'll have to grab a light. All right. I don't know if I can get you guys in there. There's too much stuff in the way. Right there, you can see the opening on the top of the bell housing up there. And that is where I actually gain access to check the ignition timing. There's a little cover that's on that. I've already popped that off. So once we have the car back up and running, I'll be able to check the ignition timing for bank to bank. Because again, they're adjusted independently on each distributor, and make sure that the timing's set where it needs to be. I don't expect to find anything, honestly, because this car does run really well once it's up and running. But I just want to check and confirm that the ignition timing is set where it needs to be, so that way when I return the car back to the client, I can ensure and know that it is set up and running how it should be once it's back in his hands. Now, while we're on the subject of ignition, let's talk about the spark plugs. You can see that I have all the spark plugs out of the engine, and there's two main reasons why that's the case. One of them is we're going to replace them. So pretty easy, we pulled them and replace them, right? but I'm leaving the spark plugs out now because I need to finish my work on the throttle linkage, and I'm probably going to have to run the throttle linkage and the carburetors through several cycles, which is going to put a lot of fuel in the engine, which is very likely going to flood the engine. So since I'm going to replace them, we can be smart with our workflow, leave the spark plugs out, make all of my adjustments to the carburetors, pump it as much as I need to, then I can crank the engine over, get all that extra fuel out of the cylinders, out of the intake, and get it cleaned out before I put in the fresh spark plugs and fire the car up. There's no reason to needlessly flood the car and really make it labor on itself to start if I can avoid it. Now I will say whoever put the spark plugs in this car last basically beat me to the punch on one of the tricks that I like to do on these older carbureted cars. So they were NGK Iridium spark plugs. NGK is my preferred brand of spark plug, but I checked the heat range on them and these had a heat range of 6. Now this car calls for a heat range of 8. Now this is the NGK heat range. Each plug manufacturer has their own. So the heat range is referring to how much porcelain is there on the spark plug, and that heat range basically determines how hot the spark plug itself runs. Now a heat range of 8 is a much colder spark plug, so they change the amount of porcelain on it so the plug itself runs a lot cooler. Now they do so that way it helps combat detonation pre-ignition by keeping the heat out of the combustion cycle and out of that spark plug. Well, on these older cars with the carburetors, that's pretty hard on them because the spark plugs tend to foul out pretty easily. So, a spark plug with a heat range of 6, which is 2 heat ranges hotter, the spark plug is actually going to operate a lot hotter than the heat range of 8 spark plug. And so as that spark plug is basically retaining more heat, it helps burn off any extra carbon that gets on the spark plug, and it essentially helps combat the spark plugs from fouling out. Now, the only downside to running a hotter spark plug is if the engine starts getting into detonation or pre-ignition. Essentially, you want to run the hottest spark plug you can without getting into any pre-ignition or detonation. So that's one of my little tricks that I like to do on these older carbureted Ferraris, is I like to take the heat range and move it 2 heat ranges hotter than what the factory calls for, and that really just helps the plugs not foul out so the client can enjoy the car a little better. Moving the spark plugs just 2 heat ranges is really safe. I have yet to encounter any issues changing it. 6 is a pretty standard heat range, honestly, so luckily this car already had that done, so the person that worked on it last kind of has the same philosophy that I have, which is just bumping the heat range up a little bit, which is just going to help the car run better on today's fuels and also be more suited to how the client's using the car. So the service work on this car is pretty much wrapped up. I need the car running to finish up the last few things, so like we mentioned, got to get the spark plugs in once you're done with the throttles. We can double check our ignition timing, set our oil level, make sure our coolant level doesn't change after a couple heat cycles, and we'll do a couple quick basic checks on the carburetors to make sure that they're pretty well synchronized and sorted. So that means we need to jump back to the throttle pedal and finish that up so we can get this car running. And fortunately, my parts have arrived, and you can see that I have my longer all thread right here, and this is just a piece of stainless all thread, which this actually is the same thing, and it was cut down, so this is not a factory part. You can see where they cut and rounded the edges, and then they painted it black. I'll clean this up or paint it when I'm done, so that way it matches or really just blends in and doesn't stand out with stainless steel. Now I transferred over this arm here that is for a throttle return spring, and I will note, much like the throttle return springs that are down on the linkage for the pedal, these are not factory. And I kind of got to thinking, so we had that throttle pedal stop that was on there that we took off, or I'm aiming to take off. That's not factory. There's the other spring that is wrapped around the lever on the bottom for where that lever sits on the underside of the car for the throttle pedal. That's not factory as well. And then there's that extra spring that sits up on this shaft. It's kind of right back here on the distributor. You can kind of see it hanging down and goes onto that bracket on the throttle rod. Again, that's not a factory piece. Now, ideally, I'd kind of personally prefer to remove all those because the car was never built with them. It was never intended to have them. And I kind of think they're on there the kind of as like an attempted fix to change the pedal feel or get the pedal return from the improper linkage geometry. And then once I fix that geometry, I'm pretty sure I won't need those items. So I left it on there for now. We're going to work to fix the geometry and get that linkage size, the fit on the car. I'm going to evaluate how the pedal feels, and then I will discuss with the client if he would like me to leave those springs on there or return it back to the condition how it was originally. So, again, basic all thread. I've already placed my fitting on and I threaded it down, so it's basically 3/4 of the way into this fitting. So the way I view that is, I personally don't like to adjust this rod any further than halfway out of this fitting, so I go from halfway to full depth is my travel range, and I cut that in half. So 3/4 essentially of the way up. That gives me a 1/4 up and a 1/4 down of adjustability within my tolerance that I want. So I have that one set in there and locked in. I'm going to install this on the top and hang it down, leaving it its full length. Then we'll raise the car in the air and we can determine where we need to shorten the rod to get the other cup on it to hit the ball. Now, before we raise the car up, I'm going to take advantage and show you that I have my throttle pedal or brake pedal depressor on the throttle pedal. And I actually ended up getting in the car, sitting in there and working the throttle pedal and just kind of trying to feel where I felt the throttle pedal should sit at its natural rest in relation to the other pedals, and also what felt natural for my foot. Once I decided that's where I wanted it, that's where I liked it, I put the pedal depressor in there, holding it in that position. So now when I get under the car and I take this rod and I have it attached up at the top onto the carburetor linkage and it's going to just be hanging, I'll basically have the carburetor linkages in the right position because they're all at idle, and the pedal is in the right position because it's at idle with my stop, and it's going to make it real easy to size up where I need to trim this rod at. So let's get the car in there, get this installed, and see how everything lines up. Alright, our new linkage is installed, so let me show you what we have. And you can see up top, there's that spring I was talking about with that lever that's not factory. But I have it attached and tight up top, and then I attached this other joint right here. And you can probably see my little Sharpie line. That's where I'm going to trim this rod. That's going to give me roughly the same 3/4 of a way, or 3/4 depth engagement up here. And this is sitting in the position with our pedal depressor inside the car, sitting where we want. I was down here looking when I was setting this up, and I totally forgot that we have this factory throttle return spring right here. And there's also one throttle return spring on each of the carburetors over by the accelerator pumps. So with this spring and the carburetors, that's 7 springs. So I'm really leaning towards taking that upper spring off and taking this spring off as well. I'm probably going to trim this rod. I'll just leave that one there for now. I'm probably going to pop this lever off, take this spring back off, get this rod put on, set to length I need, attach the spring. And from there, that's pretty much the original setup with corrected geometry. We'll operate the pedal, see how it feels, and I'm hopeful that we can reduce or eliminate these non-factory springs and get this car returned to original. So, let me get it cut, let me get everything installed, and we'll see how it ends up. So much better. So we made our cut to our rod, and you can see that I have it now all fully assembled. Also notice I just went ahead, I took that lever off, or the bracket for the spring, the other spring off, and I went all in and took this other spring down here on the shaft off as well. So it's fully assembled in the position it needs to be in. You can tell our arm is at much more of an angle now, so any pedal movement that we have on this shaft is going to be immediate movement pulling downward on this rod, which is going to actuate everything much quicker. So now that everything's assembled correctly, we have it in the original configuration. There's no aftermarket throttle stop, there's no aftermarket springs, and the geometry is correct. Let's go hop inside the car and see how the gas pedal feels when we're actuating it up there with our foot. So the first things first, I have the pedal depressor off the pedal, and visually it's sitting right where I think it should. I say visually as in it looks like it's going to physically be in the right location in relation to the brake pedal, but also it looks normal, it looks standard. It doesn't look like I have it in a funky, unusual position. But really, the moment of truth is how it feels. So we'll get our foot on there, and that feels pretty normal. So I like that. Push the pedal a little bit, and I essentially have no play at all like we used to have. And run the pedal down. Oh, that's right there is full throttle. That's the throttle stop. And that feels dead on. I like that. So that's the end travel of the pedal. Now I was saying earlier, like beforehand, I had to rotate my foot. You can see I'm lifting my heel, but I had to rotate my foot and try to bury it down there so far to get the full throttle. But now you can comfortably leave your heel rested on the floor of the car and easily get at the full throttle. That feels really nice. I think we nailed it on the first try, guys. That's pretty great. I would say, I realized when I was under the car, I was feeling some kind of like a hesitation on the throttle. And that's because if you rotate it so far down, the pedal actually starts to hit the vinyl on the side for the carpet. And obviously we don't want that, so I have my movement of the pedal free and clear of that, so it's not touching that and we don't have to worry about it sticking. And again, we took all those springs out, and you guys can see that that comes all the way back great. And our travel's great. I think we nailed it. I'm real excited about this. Now, you guys can probably tell why I have the spark plugs out, because I'm just here pumping the gas pedal a ton, so we're throwing a ton of fuel in the engine, which I was talking about, and I wanted to avoid with the spark plugs in. But I wanted to be able to come in here and feel this pedal, evaluate it, and I really think we made quite the big difference here. What I will do before we call this good is I'm going to grab some cameras, set them up how we had them before, so we can watch the difference of the actuation of this linkage from before I did these changes to after I did these changes, and we should see a pretty big difference on how everything's actuating and how it's acting on the throttles. Yeah, let's get those cameras set up, and that way we can track how much of a difference we made. Okay, so we got the camera set up so that way we can see the effects of changing the geometry on this throttle linkage and how it actuates the carburetors different in relation to our gas pedal. So I'm on the pedal right now, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, there's virtually no play. And right there I should be already just starting to tip into the carburetors with just such a little bit of movement. But if we run it through its range, we can see that it's direct and immediate, and I would say the biggest part is proportional. So kind of what my brain naturally expects for full throttle. We're getting it in the right position. And as I'm just starting to ease in, it's starting to move the carburetors. We have the fidelity for the throttle control. And I think we're set. Alright, I'm super stoked with how that throttle turned out. I know it seems like such a minor thing, just moving that arm just a couple degrees, but the effect that it has on how that throttle and the carburetors operate and the feel of it, even without the car running, I know it's going to make a huge difference, and I'm pretty excited to get the car back in the customer's hands so that way I can hear what he has to say about the changes we made. Plus, big benefit, we got rid of all those aftermarket springs and throttle stop that was on there, and the car is essentially how it's meant to be. So I will pop that rod back off and just give it a little spritz of some black paint so that way we can get all that stainless covered up and it blends in with everything else. Unfortunately, it's basically the end of my work week out here in the shop, and tomorrow I have to head in for my work week, like my other job. So I think my plan of attack is to let the car sit here. I already cranked it over a little bit with the spark plugs out to try to get that fuel flushed out of the manifolds and out of the cylinders. But I think I'll take advantage of that long weekend, let it sit over the weekend, let that fuel evaporate and permeate out of there. And next week I'll put the spark plugs in, get the car running, and we can, see the difference and play with the throttle with it running. But also I need to make my timing checks and my basic carburetor checks. And at that point, I'll consult with the client, see if there's anything else he wants me to do to the car, but I think we're pretty close to wrapping this one up. So for now, I'm going to call it, but I'll see you guys back out here next week. Well, when my work week ends, my other work week begins. Welcome back. We're back out on the 275, so we let it sit over the weekend. I've gone through and done a couple things before I even started filming this morning, so you can see that I got the wheels and tires back on it. We do have our new spark plugs installed back in, and I also have the linkage for the throttle fully assembled. But I want to jump back and take a second to talk about the tires, because there was not really a development, but I was talking to the client at the end of last week, and the tires that were on this car were from 2001, so they were 24 years old. Now in the Ferrari world, we generally replace tires based on the dot date on the tire, and it's usually 6 to 7 years, and then we recommend new tires on the car. Now it is even if the tires have amazing tread depth. So I would say it's probably more common to replace tires due to the dot dates than it is with tires wearing out on these cars. Now we do so because these tires over time, all the solvents and the tires start to evaporate out. The rubber starts to get really hard. It starts to age. It gets brittle. The rubber starts to degrade from UV exposure. So even though the tires had great tread, these ones were actually pretty soft and felt pretty pliable, but this car is kept in a climate-controlled garage all the time, so that would be expected. They were in really great shape, but, I mean, 24 years old is really old. And although we did drive the car back from the dealership with them, and there was no flat spots, no vibrations, it drove great, it really was the time to do it based on age, but also I already had the wheels off for the brake flush, and with this being a true knockoff setup, it's a little bit more cumbersome to get the wheels on and off, so we seized the opportunity, and I got to give it credit. I was able to get the tires ordered, mounted, and balanced, and today's Tuesday, and we pulled the trigger on those on Friday. So pretty impressive. Tire Rack definitely hooked us up. They had them in stock, got them here quick, and you can see they're back on the car, ready to go, so he has fresh tires, and he doesn't have to worry about it. And honestly, with the condition of this car, now that we've fixed the throttle, this car needs nothing. It is ready to go. I would not hesitate taking this thing on a road trip. I mean, this car is mechanically just as sound as it is beautiful. So some of the things I need to do for the remainder of the day today, we need to get the engine fired up. I need to get that running, warmed up, so we can set the oil level, confirm our coolant level. I also need to come back through. I'm going to do a spot check on the carburetors, make sure they're synchronized correctly. Also, do the spot check on our ignition timing, make sure that that's set correctly from bank to bank. Once everything gets a good clear bill of health, engine's running good, it's time for a final road test. But before we get to it, let's hop inside the car, prime the fuel pump, and see how much better this fires up on a cold start with the fresh plugs and the corrected throttle linkage. All right, let's see how our cold start goes. We're going to turn our key on first. Give our electric pump a prime to get the float bowls full. There we go. Waiting for the sound of the pump to change. It's starting to slow down a little. All right. So I think on the throttle pedal, now that we fixed it, we're going to give it 4 good pumps. And from here, we'll see what we get. Almost. Give it another shot. And give it another pump. I think it wanted more fuel. There we go. Running pretty good, so I'm going to let it run, get some temperature, jump up there, confirm our oil level and our coolant level. Nice. Good oil pressure. Whew, gotta get the fan going. Gotta get the fan going. So I'm just running through, doing a spot check on the carburetors. We're checking the airflow on each individual one. So if the synchronization is really out or our idle mixture is really out, we're going to see a big difference on the airflow here. So the overall number is not as important as it is how close all the numbers are to one another. And as expected, these are all dialed in, synchronized very tightly. And I didn't expect to find anything on this honestly, but it's a good, quick, easy spot check. So we ran the car, got a heat cycle in it. We're able to set and confirm our oil level. I ended up with about 15 liters of oil in this thing. It takes a lot of oil. Got the coolant level set. Really all of our fluids are set and dialed, so we're got that all taken care of. You guys saw that I put a timing light on it, so I was checking our base ignition timing on both distributors to make sure that they're equal and that it was set correctly. I also did the same thing and checked the carburetors with the airflow gauge, making sure that they're pulling the same airflow through. That really tells me how well that they're synchronized and how well the idle mixture is set, because I'm really just looking to see how closely grouped together all those carburetors are. Now, I will say that I do know the shop that serviced this car last, and which was the shop that ran through and set these carburetors up, and I do know that they do exceptional work, so I was not expecting to find anything wrong with it, but it's good to go through and do a spot check just to confirm that everything is the way it needs to be and nothing has shifted, moved, or changed since they set it up last. Now, I kind of did mention, I think at the beginning of the video, that I personally love going through and setting up the carburetors, but on something like this, it's something that I really don't want to do unless the customer is really adamant that we do it, or that there's really a true need for it, because that process can end up being so time consuming that you can really end up racking up a lot of hours of labor just going through and getting that set. So I was going through and just spot checking this car, but honestly, this thing is set up so well. I'm pretty confident that I could go through the whole procedure and I'm not going to make it any better than it is. It would just be fruitless effort at that time. So let's go back and talk about our cold start for a second. I ended up pumping the throttle pedal 4 times. It did fire off right away, but I couldn't keep it running. Honestly, I think that if I would have given it 5 pumps of full throttle on the cold start, I would have gotten it fired up, kept it running. It does take a second to clear it out, and then it runs and maintains an idle pretty much right off the bat, which is pretty impressive considering that there's no choke on it. You got 6 carburetors, it's still running points. I mean, I think that's just a testament to how well this car is set up. So, everything's set, fluid levels are good, we've done all of our checks, we know it's good, we have not, we've verified everything. I don't want to go off of assumptions, so we know that this timing's set, we know the carburetors are good, we know our fluid levels are set. I think I'm going to let it cool off a little. I need to reinstall my cover plate for my ignition timing, which is back on top of the bell housing, put the airbox back on, and at that point, I think we're ready to hit the road. Well, the car is fully back together, and I was about to hop in it for its final road test, and I realized there's one thing I forgot, and I need to take care of my license plate, meaning I still have my cover on it. Now, through my videos, when I'm working on a client's car, I do my best to cover the license plates just because it's their personal information and I don't want it shown on these videos. My own cars, I honestly don't care. However, I was speaking with this client the other night, and he did give me permission to show you his license plate, and I think it is exceptionally cool. Now, before I show you guys this particular license plate, I will say, in Washington State, on our collector cars, you can register them with a period correct license plate, meaning you can register the car with a license plate, in this case from 1967, and it stays with the car, and in our state, a classic car registration is good for life. So, what makes this plate so cool is it is a period correct 1967 license plate. However, how awesome is that? A 275 GTB license plate, period correct, for the 1967 275 GTB4. Something that I think is absolutely awesome that he was able to get that plate, have it registered to the car. That is a nice touch. Absolutely love it. Very thankful that he was good with allowing me to show you guys that on camera. And honestly, I can see why he was open to it, because how could you not show that off? It's absolutely amazing. So, we're covered up. I don't have my license plate covered. That's the last thing I need to do, is be driving around with a covered license plate, just asking to get pulled over. Now, I think we're finally ready to get this thing out on the open road. All right, this is worth showing you guys. My foot is off the gas. We have the key here. The car is up and at operating temperature. We're just going to bump it and it's going to light right off. Pretty awesome. This thing's dialed and set, and now it's finally time to get it out on the road for the test drive. I will give you guys a warning that I'm going to be focused on making sure the car runs right, and also focused on keeping it safe. So we're not going to be doing a lot of talking during this test drive, which I think you guys probably won't mind. We're just going to kick back. You guys are going to enjoy the test drive, the sights and the sounds, and we'll see you back here in a minute. Test drive successful. We were able to drive the car. We had no problems. That's outstanding. We got the car back safely. No issues on the road. Even better. And you can see that I did put the car back on the lift. I did so because I wanted to just take one more peek underneath the car before I return it to the client. Make sure there's no leaks. Make sure there's nothing loose. Just make sure everything is in order. I took advantage to make sure the wheels are on and tight. Make sure our knockoffs are good. And there is one other thing I did, and that's when I was driving the car. The difference that we made on the throttle linkage was dramatic. So during the test drive, actuating the throttle felt exactly how it should, and it made a radical difference in my opinion. And honestly, I'm pretty excited to see what the client thinks of the changes I made to the car. However, I did feel that there was some room for improvement on the clutch linkage and the feel of the clutch pedal. So while I was under there checking everything underneath on the bottom of the car, I did make some adjustments to the clutch linkage. So I basically got rid of the little bit of free play that was in there. Went as far as I could, but I didn't want to go too far because I don't want the release bearing to be spinning on the flywheel when the clutch is disengaged. So I got that adjusted as far as I can go on it, and I think that's going to make a pretty decent improvement on the clutch feel also, and make it a little bit easier to drive the car, because with the clutch feel and the play that it had when I drove it initially, it was a little tough just to get a good clean getaway from a dead stop with the clutch. So that's taken care of, and honestly guys, pretty basic service we did to the car. We did a little bit of fussing with the linkages, which really made a dramatic difference, and the car is fitted with new tires. So the car's all set, serviced, and ready to go, and hopefully the client's going to have it out on the road and enjoy it this summer. So I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, and I do feel that it is truly an honor and a privilege to be able to work on, service, and drive any Ferrari. However, to have a car like this 275 in the shop is kind of on another level, guys, to tell you the truth. It really means a lot to me that the client trusts me and my work enough to have me working on this car and servicing it. Cars like this don't come along very often. They're very rare, very low production numbers. And it really is an honor and privilege to have this in the shop, to be able to go through the car, service it, make a few small changes to it. We definitely made the car better than when it came in, and ultimately trusting me out on the open road with the car. And it's just something that I'm very grateful for. Hopefully, we'll be seeing this car back in the shop down the road. Maybe we'll see some more come in. You never know. All right, guys, you know the deal. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Definitely get down. Drop your comments below. Let me know what you thought. As always, I appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.